When we think of great tech geniuses, the image that comes to mind is almost always the same. Famous guys changing the world from a garage and magically turning into billionaires. Seems like the perfect dream, right? But the reality of building a company from scratch is a far cry from that fairy tale. In truth, it's a mix of panic attacks, crazy investors, and a whole lot of social awkwardness. No show has captured this absurd chaos quite as well as Silicon Valley. Here we follow Richard, a brilliant programmer who accidentally creates a revolutionary algorithm, but is an absolute disaster when it comes to being a CEO. Instead of taking $10 million right off the bat to bury his idea, he decides to start his own company, Pied Piper. From then on, we watch a band of misfits battle soulless corporate giants in an environment where ego is worth way more than talent. It is simply the most brilliant and hilariously scathing critique ever made of the tech world. That's why, today on the channel, Silicon Valley, the absurdly comical portrait of how technology is actually made. Richard Hendricks is a brilliant programmer but a terrible smooth talker. He works at Hooli, one of those tech giants that feels more like a corporate cult, where CEO Gavin Belson is treated as an untouchable deity. The campus is so colorful and full of perks that it almost makes you forget the employees are basically selling their souls. But Richard's real life happens at the home of Erlich Bachman, an eccentric millionaire who lets a bunch of guys live rent-free in exchange for a 10% stake in whatever they invent. It's there that Richard shares a space with his housemates Bighead, Dinesh, and Guilfoyle. In his spare time, Richard built Pied Piper. In theory, it's a music copyright app. In practice, it hides an absurdly powerful data compression algorithm. The problem is that Richard can't explain his own invention without using impenetrable technical jargon that drives everyone away. Still, the secret leaks out, and the war begins. Suddenly, the algorithm that nobody understood becomes the belle of the corporate ball. Gavin Belson, the all-powerful boss of Hooli, puts a dream offer on the table: $10 million to buy Pied Piper and bury the project. On the other side is Peter Gregory, an even more bizarre billionaire who despises colleges and literally pays kids to drop out. Peter offers significantly less money, but leaves 95% of the company in Richard's hands. Helped by Monica, Peter's assistant, and probably the only sane person in this story, Richard makes the decision of his life. He turns down Hooli's guaranteed $10 million and chooses the hardest path, becoming the CEO of his own company alongside Peter Gregory. The team celebrates with a toast led by Guilfoyle, who, by the way, is an avowed LaVeyan Satanist, because of course he is. The first big step has been taken, but the real headache is just beginning. Turning down $10 million brings swift and ruthless consequences. Richard now has a $200,000 check from Peter Gregory in his hands, but he can't deposit it because Pied Piper doesn't even exist on paper. When he goes to ask for guidance, Peter demands a business plan and a cap table, the capitalization table that defines who owns what percentage of the company. Since Richard has absolutely none of this prepared, he is dismissed from the office with almost Willy Wonka levels of disdain. Erlich warns him right off the bat: if Richard doesn't start acting like an asshole, the company is dead. But the one who actually saves the protagonist's skin is Jared, a former Hooli employee so traumatized by Gavin Belson's corporate abuse that he still asks for permission to go to the bathroom. Jared jumps ship, joins Richard's team, and they start putting together the damn cap table. That's when the claws come out. Dinesh and Guilfoyle, despite spending all day trading barbs and insults, are essential to the code. Bighead, on the other hand, well, his magnum opus is an app called Nip Alert, focused on tracking women's erect nipples. The name is self-explanatory, and its practical utility is zero. The team comes to an obvious consensus: Bighead is dead weight and has no place at Pied Piper. Richard finally tries to act like a real leader, putting his foot down with the team to keep his best friend on the project. Except Gavin Belson is faster and infinitely more vindictive. Fueled by pure spite, the Hooli CEO hires Bighead for $600,000, simply to destabilize Richard and use his friend as a corporate puppet. And if losing his friend wasn't enough, Bighead delivers the worst news possible. In an amateurish attempt to prove his worth before leaving Hooli, Richard had sent Pied Piper's code to some of the company's programmers. Now the massive Hooli machine is reverse engineering the algorithm to launch their own version called Nucleus. Richard bet everything on controlling his own company, but with a competitor this size about to crush him, he might end up owning 95% 90% of absolutely nothing. Richard has an undeniable talent for coding, but as a CEO, he's a walking disaster. For starters, he names the company Pied Piper without even checking if the trademark is available. Surprise, it is not. It belongs to a sprinkler company in California. To make matters worse, he didn't even bother to read up on the original legend of the Pied Piper of Hamelin, which basically involves a guy kidnapping children and luring them all into a cave. A truly excellent mascot for Silicon Valley. While Richard deals with the burden of terrible branding and a hideous green team t-shirt he had made, Hooli wastes no time. Gavin Belson launches a commercial for his reverse engineering project, Nucleus. The speech is classic corporate madness. Gavin claims that compressing audio files is the first step towards shrinking cancer. Dinesh gives it to Richard straight. In the tech market, whoever gets there first wins, even if the product is inferior. Ehrlich hates the name Pied Piper. To him, a company needs a primal name, something you would scream in an intimate moment. To resolve this creative crisis, Ehrlich adopts a peculiar method. He eats an entire bag of magic mushrooms and goes on a spiritual journey.
Oh shit.
The trip ends with a bizarre hallucination mashing up every tech logo in the world, which ironically makes him accept that Pied Piper will do just fine. On the other side of town, Peter Gregory demonstrates his own brand of eccentric genius. Facing a midnight deadline to decide whether to save one of his companies from bankruptcy, he ignores the founder's desperation and obsessively fixates on Burger King. More specifically, on the sesame seeds on their buns. It looks like total insanity, but this hyperfixation makes his brain connect invisible dots in the global market, resulting in a $68 million profit. The company is saved. Richard's climax arrives when the owner of the sprinkler company shows up wanting to beat him up over a financial misunderstanding. Jared suggests that Richard repeatedly shout his own name to humanize himself to his attacker, because of course that's Jared's logic. Fortunately, Richard ignores the advice and uses a mix of creative negotiation and pure pity to buy the naming rights. The Pied Piper is officially in the game. Over at Hooli, Big Head discovers the dark side of the corporate world, or rather, the incredibly lucrative and boring side. Since he knows absolutely nothing about the code Hooli is trying to copy, HR throws him into unassigned, the roof. In Gavin Belson's management philosophy, not having a role is the ultimate badge of shame for an employee. In practice, Big Head and his colleagues spend their days resting and vesting, doing absolutely nothing, waiting for their stock options to mature and grabbing lunch at Arby's. The true American dream. While Big Head earns a fortune to keep a chair warm, Richard is facing his worst nightmare. Peter Gregory wants to hear Pied Piper's vision, but Richard can't explain his own product to a normal human being. Dinesh doesn't let the irony slide. The guy turned down $10 million for an idea he doesn't even know how to pitch. What Richard urgently needs is someone focused on the big picture. A Steve Jobs to his Steve Wozniak. The epiphany comes during Peter Gregory's absurd toga party, featuring a live performance by Flo Rida and a startup exclusively dedicated to providing attractive women to feign interest in the rich nerds' conversations. It's in this chaotic environment that a drunk Richard makes an impulsive decision and puts Ehrlich on the company's board of directors. Guilfoyle immediately warns him that this is a fatal mistake, as Ehrlich and Peter could team up and vote Richard out of his own business. The next day, a sober and terrified Richard rescinds the offer, but the universe collects its toll during the meeting with Peter. Richard goes into full-blown panic mode in the bathroom, having such a meltdown that he ends up having to borrow Jared's pants. In the conference room, Peter is brutally precise and entirely unhelpful, stating he can't guide a rudderless ship. That's when Ehrlich steps in. He takes control of the room, spits out the perfect corporate jargon, and masterfully pitches the vision of Pied Piper, saving Richard's skin. Ultimately, drunk Richard's intuition was right. He realizes that Ehrlich is exactly the smooth-talking partner he needs to survive the business sharks, and gives him his board seat back. The team is taking shape, but a silent detail on Peter Gregory's wall hints that the rabbit hole goes deeper. An old photograph of him standing side by side with his current arch-nemesis, Gavin Belson. Ehrlich decides that Pied Piper needs some street cred and hires a graffiti artist named Chuy Ramirez to paint a mural on their garage door. The price tag? 10 grand. Money the company definitely doesn't have, as Jared makes sure to remind them. The goal is to create a new logo to replace the old one, which the team agrees looked vaguely obscene, except the new one manages to be worse. The mural depicts Dinesh, dressed as an Aztec warrior, having his way with the Statue of Liberty.
What is happening? Is that Dinesh?
Is that the Statue of Liberty?
Hey, neighbor. Ashley's getting big. She looks
Chewie drew Dinesh because he assumed he was Latino. Ehrlich, terrified of coming off as racist, didn't have the guts to tell the guy he's actually Pakistani and just let the misunderstanding slide. Meanwhile, the vibe in the house remains chaotic. Dinesh and Guilfoyle spend all day bickering, wasting precious time. Trying to bring some order to the house, Jared implements a corporate management system, Scrum, which makes Guilfoyle complain that this just turned into a real job. To speed up the work, Jared pits the two programmers against each other. The tactic works a little too well. Guilfoyle starts coding 4 times faster, and Dinesh gets so paranoid about falling behind that he walks right past the garage and doesn't even notice the atrocity painted with his face. When Ehrlich finally musters the courage to tell the truth about Dinesh's ethnicity, the graffiti artist exacts his revenge by altering the art once more, this time putting Ehrlich himself in a highly compromising position on the mural. While all this is happening, a ticking time bomb goes off. Before securing their funding, Richard had submitted Pied Piper to TechCrunch Disrupt, a massive startup battlefield. The news reaches Gavin Belson, who freaks out, assuming it's a masterstroke by Peter Gregory. In response, the Hooli CEO secures the keynote speaker slot at the event, planning to launch Nucleus there just to publicly crush Pied Piper. Richard can't back out now, otherwise he'll look like he's running from the fight. Peter Gregory himself is furious about the situation. Monica gives it to Richard straight. The billionaire couldn't care less about the startup, but she does, and she believes the team can deliver a working prototype in time. And to complete the cycle of humiliation, Gavin Belson simply buys the controversial garage door for $500,000 and installs it at the Hooli campus, just to rub it in his rivals' faces. With TechCrunch right around the corner, the pressure crushes Richard, who completely freezes up when trying to integrate Pied Piper into the cloud. With only a week to present a working prototype, the team realizes they need outside help. Ehrlich convinces Richard to hire a legendary underground tech consultant known as the Carver, famous for allegedly hacking into the Bank of America. The suspense is palpable, but when the legend arrives, Kevin, the Carver's real name, is a kid who looks about 14 years old. Fueled by Mellow Yellow, Oreos, and a concerning amount of Adderall, the kid promises to fix their entire cloud issue for $20,000 in just 2 days. Surprisingly, he finishes the job on time, but there's a slight catch. He shreds Pied Piper's entire codebase in the process, basically a startup's worst nightmare. On the other side of the house, the tension has nothing to do with code. Tara, Guilfoyle's Satanist girlfriend, comes for a visit. The vibe would be weird enough, but Guilfoyle drops a bomb. He casually mentions that Tara wants to sleep with Dinesh, and that he is completely fine with it. Dinesh spirals into a panic and starts making a pros and cons list, paralyzed by the proposition. Ehrlich, with his unshakable ego, is deeply offended to realize Tara prefers Dinesh over him. Trying to prove he's still the most seductive guy in the room, he ends up tagging along with the group to a bizarre satanic baptism taking place ironically at a Chick-fil-A. While the house burns down around them, Jared makes a fatal error in trusting technology. He gets into Peter Gregory's self-driving car. The problem is that the vehicle's system suddenly reroutes. Instead of driving around Palo Alto, the car decides to head straight for Arelon, a man-made island the billionaire is building in the middle of the ocean. Trapped inside, Jared literally gets shipped off into the Pacific, trying not to lose his mind while Christopher Cross's Sailing plays in the background. Without his main voice of reason, Richard is left entirely alone in the wreckage left by the Wunderkind. Over at TechCrunch Disrupt, the battlefield is heating up, but the Pied Piper team falls into a black hole of distraction. The reason? The rare presence of a woman on the floor.
This place is a vortex of distraction. Normally in the tech world is 2% women. I need you to focus. How we do here is the entire future of your company.
Specifically Charlotte, a blonde from a pink booth called Cupcakely, who feigns ignorance about coding just to get Guilfoyle and Dinesh to write her software for her. Dinesh thinks he hit the jackpot when she invites him back to her hotel room, but the real turn-on for him isn't the girl, it's a brilliant line of Java code he thinks she wrote. But when push comes to shove, Dinesh freezes upon looking at her laptop screen, and realizing the author of that code was actually Guilfoyle. The guy literally used programming to get inside his rival's head and ruin the moment. Meanwhile, Richard completely loses his focus because Big Head tips him off that a high school ex-girlfriend is at the event spreading rumors that Richard was a stalker. The Pied Piper CEO gets completely neurotic over the gossip, almost forgetting he has a crucial piece of software to deliver. Luckily, Jared, even unintentionally, manages to bring his boss back to reality and get him to focus on the work. But the real ticking time bomb at the event goes by the name of Ehrlich. One of the TechCrunch judges is Dan Melcher, a man whose wife Ehrlich slept with 3 years ago. Ehrlich does some digging heartbreaking and finds out Dan got divorced and remarried. It seemed like a relief until the new mistress Melcher starts interrogating Ehrlich at the hotel bar about his ex-wife. Anyone can see the disaster brewing. When it's time for the final presentation, everything seems to be on track. Richard's code runs smoothly in the tests, and the event production even sets up some Steve Jobs-level dramatic lighting for Ehrlich to shine on stage. It was set up to be the perfect software demo, but instead of a brilliant pitch about data compression, what the audience gets is a bloody fistfight on stage between Ehrlich and Judge Dan Melcher. Surprisingly, the onstage brawl turns into an advantage. To avoid a massive lawsuit over the public embarrassment, the TechCrunch organizers bump Pied Piper straight into the finals and even upgrade their hotel suite. Ehrlich, sporting a black eye, brags that getting beaten up and sleeping with the judge's wife was ultimately a brilliant strategic move. Except the victory lap evaporates the second Gavin Belson steps onto the stage. The Hooli CEO presents Nucleus, a shameless ripoff of Pied Piper, claiming to have matched their exact compression score. He threatens to sue any competitor who claims to be faster, and just to rub it in, he brings out Shakira to close the presentation. It's a heavy-handed display of corporate intimidation. Panic sets in, and even the billionaire Peter Gregory throws in the towel, ordering Monica to pack up and go home. Desperate as the ship goes down, Guilfoyle and Dinesh try to snag jobs at another startup right there on the floor, but their tactic backfires so badly they end up convincing the other founder to want to work at Pied Piper instead. Jared, bordering on hallucination from lack of sleep, wanders the streets scaring pedestrians with insane pivot ideas for the company, suggesting everything from a GPS child tracking app to software that predicts whether you're going to heaven or hell. Cornered, Ehrlich delivers a hyperbolic ultimatum in the hotel room. They are going to win, even if he has to personally jerk off every single one of the 800 guys in the audience to get their votes. Instead of ignoring the absurdity of the statement, the programmers start doing dead serious mathematical calculations on the physical logistics of performing this task en masse. It is the pure essence of engineering applied to the worst possible scenario, and bizarrely, listening to his friends furiously debating angles, formulas, and mean jerk times middle out makes something click in Richard's mind. He rushes to his computer in a trance state and stays up all night rewriting the entire compression engine. When Richard takes the stage for the live demo, he runs a file through the new system and hits the highest score ever recorded in history, a Weissman score of 5.2. Pied Piper not only wins TechCrunch, but humiliates Hooli in front of the entire industry. Backstage, Monica congratulates Richard, excitedly warning him that now that he's a massive success, people are going to steal his ideas and sue him for the rest of his life. The weight of reality finally hits, and the Pied Piper CEO celebrates his massive victory the only way he knows how, by running out into the alley and puking in a dumpster. Richard's newfound fame lands him on the Jumbotron at AT&T Park during a game, and, as expected, he panics and embarrasses himself in front of the entire stadium. Now that Pied Piper has won TechCrunch Disrupt, all eyes are on them. But behind the scenes, the mood is grim. Peter Gregory has died.
Peter Gregory is dead.
Holy shit.
Taking his place at Raviga Capital is Lori Bream, an executive who seems to operate with the cold efficiency of an assembly line robot. Even amidst the mourning, VC firms are salivating over Pied Piper. Feeling they have the upper hand, Ehrlich decides to use a highly questionable tactic in their pitch meetings, negging. He starts swearing, acting utterly obnoxious, and verbally abusing the firm executives. The most absurd part is that the reverse psychology works perfectly, and the valuations for the company skyrocket. Lori doesn't want to be left behind and puts an astronomical offer on the table. The problem is that Monica, being the sole voice of reason, warns Richard not to take it. If they can't generate immediate revenue to justify that mountain of money, the company will be swallowed up by an unrecoverable down round. In the midst of this financial dilemma, everyone attends Peter Gregory's funeral, whose death involved a bizarre combination of startled hippos and a heart condition. Gavin Belson, always needing to come out on top, delivers an emotional eulogy and releases white doves to symbolize peace. But it's pure theater. Right as the birds take flight, Richard gets a notification on his phone. Gavin has just sued the pants off Pied Piper, claiming Richard stole the technology from Nucleus. Gavin's move yields immediate results. As soon as she finds out about the lawsuit, Lori Bream deems Pied Piper too high of a risk and simply drops the company from Raviga's portfolio. Richard and Ehrlich try to circle back to the other investors, but the plan backfires. Between Hooli's legal threats and Ehrlich's toxic behavior in their previous meetings, no one wants to touch them with a 10-foot pole. As the ship sinks, a parallel subplot unfolds. Dinesh's cousin launches an app called Bro, which exclusively serves to send the word bro to other people. Guilfoyle, always ready to torment Dinesh, donates $500 to the crowdfunding campaign out of pure spite, helping the guy hit his $50,000 goal. In the midst of their desperate scramble for cash, Jared thinks he's found an investor through that very same app. He and Ehrlich go in for the pitch, but quickly realize it's a trap. There is zero intention to invest. It's a brain rape, a dirty Silicon Valley tactic where an investor feigns interest just to extract the details of an algorithm and steal the idea. The two bolt before giving away the gold. Out of options and needing $2.5 million just to hire a second-rate lawyer, Richard gets a call from his arch-nemesis himself. Gavin Belson invites him for a private chat at a bar and lays his cards on the table. He offers to buy Pied Piper and bring Richard back to Hooli. Gavin plays mind games, arguing that if Richard stays in this corporate war, he'll inevitably turn into the exact type of soulless executive he so despises. Richard takes a deep breath and opens his mouth to give his answer, but, with perfectly irritating timing, a loud mariachi band invades the room and completely kills the conversation. Richard is about to march toward his own slaughter and sign a terrible buyout agreement with Gavin Belson at a Mexican restaurant, but the universe drops an orange McLaren right in front of him. Out steps Russ Hanneman, the newest, loudest investor interested in Pied Piper. Russ showers Richard with compliments, pays for an $800 dinner, and slides a $5 million check across the table. The protagonist, a genius at coding but terrible at business, accepts the offer without even doing a background check on where the money comes from. The problem is that Russ is basically the billionaire insufferable version of Ehrlich. He made his fortune putting radio on the internet 20 years ago and hasn't done anything remotely useful since, spending his days handing out terrible advice. Ehrlich immediately develops a massive man crush, seeing their new boss as a mirror of the success he's always wanted. Dinesh and Guilfoyle, however, realize instantly that the guy is a disaster, but he owns them now. While Pied Piper deals with this chaotic new partner, over at Hooli, the useless Bighead continues failing upward. Gavin Belson cooks up a dirty scheme. He's going to repeatedly promote Bighead to build the false narrative that Pied Piper's technology was actually created in-house at Hooli. Bighead's reward for being a legal pawn who does absolutely nothing all day? A $600,000 salary. Gavin, incidentally, is facing his own PR nightmares. During a live stream, he tries to defend billionaires from public criticism and ends up comparing the treatment of the super rich to the suffering of Jews in the Holocaust. It is an indefensible PR disaster, even by Silicon Valley standards. Amidst all this corporate insanity, Jared solidifies his place as the heart of the team. In a rare moment of vulnerability, he thanks Richard for giving him back his self-worth. Jared gets so genuinely hyped about the team's victory that even the clueless Russ catches the vibe.
This guy fucks. Thank you.
With the deadline for the massive CES tech trade show right around the corner, Pied Piper urgently needs coding reinforcements. Richard's best options come down to two names: a guy with a pacemaker, whom Ehrlich affectionately dubs the Cyborg, and a badass programmer named Carla. Dinesh and Guilfoyle highly recommend Carla because her work is flawless. But the duo's respect evaporates in 5 seconds when they find out she'll be making more than both of them. Carla isn't just a beast at the keyboard. She perfectly understands the house's boys club dynamic and has a blast living rent-free in their heads. Her main target is Jared, who nearly has a meltdown trying to enforce strict corporate sexual harassment policies in an environment that is pure chaos. Richard finally shows a little backbone, ignores Ehrlich's protests against the Cyborg, who had screwed him over in the past, and takes the hires to the board for approval. The meeting takes place at Russ Hanneman's mansion, who shows off his newest toy, a bizarre female voice software designed solely to yell at his kids, freeing him from being the bad cop parent. And as if his eccentricity wasn't enough, Russ blows $30,000 of the startup's hard-earned budget, ordering terrible promotional swag with the wrong Pied Piper logo. The billionaire's only real use in the meeting is to crush Ehrlich's ego, shutting down any attempt he makes to buddy up to the exclusive Trey Commas Club. Over at Hooli, Gavin Belson's theatrics reach new heights. He announces Hooli XYZ, a top-secret and incredibly ambitious division. The co-head dream team for this new venture, a renowned robotics genius, and Bighead. The scientist is furious at having to share the command, but Bighead gets a plush office and an assistant. His day-to-day job continues to be absolutely nothing, except now, it comes with executive support. Gavin Belson continues his personal vendetta to destroy Pied Piper, and this time, he's playing dirty. Throwing Hooley's full weight and influence around, he puts Richard on a corporate blacklist, causing all the major server hosting companies to deny the startup space. With nowhere to host the platform, Richard is backed into a corner and makes a drastic decision. Take the money meant for their dream office and buy physical hardware. The new plan is to brute force Pied Piper online by building their own servers. The heavy lifting falls into Guilfoyle's lap, who starts turning Ehrlich's garage into a bootleg data center. There's just one problem. The garage was already occupied. Jared, who had taken a brutal pay cut for the good of the company, was secretly living there. Since he needs to clear the space for the rigs, he ends up sharing a room with Richard. That's when they discover Jared has a terrible habit of speaking German in his sleep, at the top of his lungs. With the garage running at full steam, a new obstacle appears in the form of Noah, a nosy neighbor. He discovers the operation and threatens to report Ehrlich for running a commercial business in a strictly residential zone. A zoning violation could shut everything down, but Richard catches a lucky break. He finds out Noah breeds ferrets, which are illegal in California. Richard uses the intel to blackmail the neighbor and buy his silence. Very mob style, just with rodents. Meanwhile, the eternal rivalry between Guilfoyle and Dinesh reaches a new level. Dinesh mocks Guilfoyle's manual labor, but decides to mess with the hardware to prove he also knows how to build a server. The result is catastrophic. He fries the machines, knocks out the power to the entire neighborhood, and destroys the genius system Guilfoyle had rigged to bypass the electric meter.
That's kind of the
Oh, hey guys.
Dude, what the fuck?
The power's up.
Back at Hooley, things continue to defy all logic. A director tries to fire Big Head for being completely useless, but it backfires spectacularly, and the director ends up rage quitting himself. Gavin Belson doesn't blink. He seizes the opportunity and promotes Big Head to sole lead of the new Hooley XYZ division, doubling down on the lie that he's the true genius behind Pied Piper, and Big Head just accepts it with his signature blank stare. Hooley sets the stage for the grand launch of its algorithm, Nucleus, by sponsoring the live broadcast of the most anticipated UFC fight of the year. Gavin Belson gives a hyped-up speech, throws some air kicks for the camera, but the technology simply can't handle the load. The feed buffers and freezes right in the middle of the screen in front of millions of people. Later, a consumer focus group confirms the disaster. Nucleus isn't just bad, it has reached Apple Maps levels of tragedy. Smelling blood in the water, the Pied Piper team decides it's the perfect time to strike back. Monica suggests they stream their own event to prove their algorithm works flawlessly exactly where Hooley failed. Ehrlich remembers Aaron AA, an old college classmate who now owns Homicide, an ultra-aggressive energy drink brand focused on extreme sports. Homicide is about to broadcast an insane car jump by a stunt driver named Blaine. It seems like a perfect match for Pied Piper until the team realizes Blaine made a basic math error in the physics of the jump. If he hits the ramp at the planned speed, he will die. Guilfoyle tries to warn the driver, who acts like an arrogant jerk and brushes off the warning. This creates a bizarre ethical dilemma. Dinesh and Guilfoyle decide to use a corporate technique, putting together a SWOT board, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, to decide whether they should warn Blaine again or just let him crash. Dinesh even lists Blaine's wife becoming a widow as a major opportunity. The tension spikes when Blaine drops by the room unannounced to apologize for his arrogance, right as the two frantically scramble to hide the giant whiteboard reading, "Let Blaine die." Even though the stuntman survives and peace is made, the deal falls apart completely. AA reveals he's hated Ehrlich since college, refuses to put the Pied Piper logo on the broadcast, and ends up signing with a rival company called Endframe. The final blow comes when Richard finds out who is behind Endframe, the same investors who set up a fake brain rate meeting weeks ago just to extract ideas. They stole Pied Piper's logic right off the whiteboards, built an identical product, and now Russ Hanneman, furious at the team's incompetence in closing the deal, hangs up on Richard. Pied Piper is on the ropes, and Richard finally decides to fight for his own company. The team heads over to Endframe's HQ to try and salvage the situation, where chaos immediately ensues in the lobby when Ehrlich is mistaken for the CEO. Dinesh, however, is too busy swiping on Tinder. He matches with a girl and decides to play the role of an adventurous guy, going as far as plotting to steal a kid's drawing to fake a museum visit, but the plan blows up in his face. Guilfoyle finds out Dinesh used Endframe's guest Wi-Fi. To make matters worse, Dinesh's date is quickly exposed shortly after logging into the incubator's Wi-Fi. She is in fact one of Ehrlich's old flings, and Ehrlich smoothly steals her back to the sound of 80s romantic synth pop. Dinesh is still striking out, and Guilfoyle doesn't let him live down the humiliation. Meanwhile, Richard crashes End-Frame's pitch meeting. The place is basically a boiler room full of aggressive salesmen pushing a vastly inferior service, proving that a product doesn't even need to be good if you know how to force it down the consumer's throat. Richard rejects the merger offer pushed by Russ Hanneman, who gets enraged at losing a chunk of his fortune and peels out in his obnoxious sports car. At Hooli, Gavin Belson is pulling off some real corporate gymnastics. He tries to convince the board that failure is success, using examples like the Apple Newton paving the way for the iPhone. Pressured by his algorithm's recent UFC embarrassment, Gavin promises a revolutionary, top-secret new feature for Nucleus. The only catch is that this feature doesn't exist. He rushes down to Hooli XYZ begging Big Head to invent anything that justifies the lie, but Big Head, predictably, comes up empty.
Maybe start after lunch?
Pied Piper's big masterstroke comes courtesy of Guilfoyle's malice. He finds a post-it note with End-Frame's admin password, hacks into their server, and uncovers a multi-million-dollar contract with Intersight, a giant in the porn industry. Monica strategically steps out of the room to pretend she didn't just witness a corporate crime, and Guilfoyle encourages Richard to fully embrace the dark side. Richard goes to Intersight's CEO, comes clean about the stolen code, and scores a golden opportunity, a direct bake-off. Intersight will test both End-Frame's and Pied Piper's algorithms to see which compresses their massive video library faster. Winner takes the $15 million contract. The toll of embracing the dark side quickly catches up to them. Richard is consumed by guilt when he finds out Seth, End-Frame's security guy, was fired because of the hack. Guilfoyle, on the other hand, is beaming with pure evil joy and declares that Pied Piper is now officially a team of black hats. While Richard agonizes, Jin Yang tries his luck building a new app. Ehrlich takes him to pitch the idea at Raviga, but on the way, they uncover Monica's deepest secret: she smokes. In Palo Alto, that's practically a felony. Lori, head of Raviga, even stages a bizarre and deeply uncomfortable anti-smoking intervention in the office. Taking the cue, Ehrlich and Jin Yang pivot the app's focus. The original version, which located empty playgrounds and accidentally served as the perfect tool for pedophiles, becomes Smocation, designed to track and avoid smokers. Lori immediately agrees to fund it, but the dream dies seconds later when Jin Yang lights up a cigarette he stole from Monica right in the middle of the pitch. At Hooli, Gavin Belson desperately needs a scapegoat for the impending failure of Nucleus. He sweet-talks Dr. Bannercheck, who was on his way out to MIT, seducing him with promises of power to lead the project. The doctor takes the bait, but isn't as dumb as he looks. 11 minutes after taking the job and seeing the unsalvageable mess the algorithm is, he flees the company. Gavin then realizes he has no one left to blame but himself, leading to a fit of rage where he smashes a piece of wood with a hammer. Richard's paranoia peaks. Ignoring all logic, he tracks down Seth at a playground to personally confess that the hack was Pied Piper's fault. His pacifist strategy fails miserably, and a screaming Seth vows to annihilate their system. Panic grips the team on the day of the big Intersight download competition, leading them to set up an off-the-grid server base to prevent any cyber attacks. The download starts and everything seems to be going well, until the video files suddenly start disappearing. 9,000 hours of content get deleted. Richard goes into shock, thinking Seth managed to hack them, but the truth is much stupider. Russ Hanneman, who had been parading around the office all day showing off his Tres Calmas tequila, simply rested the heavy bottle right on the main laptop's delete key.
Come on outside, everybody. I won't waste your time. Just for a second.
Stop! Make it stop! Make it stop! It just stopped deleting.
Intersight's CEO screams at the team and kicks them out after the disaster. Once again, Pied Piper is back to square one. Pied Piper is on life support. The money has dried up, the new coders have jumped ship, and the company's fate is going to be decided in binding arbitration against Hooli. A fast-tracked 2-day trial. Richard meets up with Big Head, resulting in the biggest breakthrough of the season. After being humiliated by the Nucleus team at a bar, Big Head hands Richard a Hooli prototype phone left behind by one of the developers. The discovery on the device is pure gold. Nucleus is such a disaster that instead of compressing the files, it actually makes them larger. It's the perfect leverage to force Gavin Belson to back down, but Gavin refuses to cave. What follows is a classic Wild West standoff, just with death glares across a boardroom table. Out of options, Richard's stuffy corporate lawyer brings in Pete, a pro bono lawyer who was disbarred for a laundry list of crimes that could spawn its own Netflix documentary. Surprisingly, Pete knows his stuff and helps the team sift through the avalanche batch of Discovery documents dumped by Hooli. Meanwhile, Pied Piper's Condor Nest Cam is still live. Jared calls the museum to check on the status of the eggs, setting off a disastrous butterfly effect. While prepping the case, Pete finds a massive red flag, old emails from Richard talking about his girlfriend who was in the shop. In a plot twist straight out of the movie Her, the girlfriend was actually his laptop. The lethal detail is that Richard admits in the email to testing the algorithm on a Hooli computer while his was broken. If Hooli figures out who the girlfriend was, Pied Piper is dead in the water. And who spills the beans? Ehrlich, of course. On the witness stand, he accidentally blurts out the laptop secret. Cornered when it's his turn to testify, Richard decides to tell the truth under oath, practically handing the keys to the company over on a silver platter. To cap off the chaos, the museum worker dispatched to remove the Condor Cam falls off a cliff, and the whole thing is broadcast live. Guilfoyle instantly blames Jared's phone call for the tragedy. The arbitration wraps up, and Gavin Belson can already taste victory, but his arrogance comes back to bite him. Not content with just winning the tech, Gavin takes one last swing and sues Richard for hiring Jared, claiming a breach of his non-compete clause. That's when the tables completely turn. The judge points out that non-compete clauses are illegal in California, and since those clauses were written into the original employment agreements, the contracts are null and void. Legally, Richard was never a Hooli employee during the time he created the algorithm. Pied Piper belongs to him. End of story. The only problem is, Richard doesn't know this yet. Thinking he lost everything, he texts Jared with the final order: delete all the code. If Hooli is going to steal the company, they're getting an empty server. Away from the courthouse, the live stream of the man trapped on the cliff goes viral. The desperation draws massive crowds, and even Manny Pacquiao tweets about the video. Traffic on Pied Piper's servers explodes. Ehrlich, who was on the verge of selling the house out of sheer bankruptcy, and the rest of the team go into war mode to keep the stream running, stressing the system to the point of nearly catching the hardware on fire. When Richard finally finds out he won the case, he makes a desperate physical sprint to stop his own sabotage. He gets home too late. The command was already executed, but by a sheer stroke of ironic fate, the deletion script coded by Dinesh fails and crashes the system before wiping anything. Their own technical incompetence actually ends up saving the company. It's a moment of absolute triumph. They beat Hooli in court, the Cliff Guy is rescued on livestream, and Pied Piper survives against all odds. Until Lori Bream, Raviga's cold, calculating new managing partner, buys out Russ Hanneman's shares and takes majority control of the board. She looks at the metrics, completely ignores their epic journey, and focuses on the facts. Richard only survived out of sheer dumb luck and irrational decisions. And, in a brutal gut punch to end the season, he is unceremoniously fired as CEO of the very company he just saved.
I just got fired.
His spot as CTO was still guaranteed in the new structure, but Richard throws a total diva fit and flat out quits. Taking his place is Jack Barker, better known in Silicon Valley as Action Jack. The guy is a living legend. He founded billion-dollar companies and even started a cancer research fund. What does Richard think about this? He yells that he won't hand his company over to a guy who didn't even cure cancer. Logic has officially left the building. Meanwhile, the team's loyalty is tested. Monica shows up at Ehrlich's incubator to justify her vote against Richard, claiming she needed to stay at Raviga to act as an inside ally. The confession doesn't earn her any forgiveness, just Ehrlich being Ehrlich and bringing up the length of her skirt from her Catholic school days. Monica's response is a beautiful, resounding fuck off. Out back, Guilfoyle and Dinesh suffer a crisis of practicality. They respect Richard, but they think it's absurd for him to expect everyone to quit their jobs out of solidarity. To save time during their debates, they even coin the acronym RIGBY. Richard is great, but you know. They decide to stay at Pied Piper, but soon realize they can't actually decipher their friend's code. Their rebellion hits a brick wall of their own incompetence. In the corporate corner of the ring, Gavin Belson makes a ruthless move at Hooli to escape the contract loophole that ruined his previous lawsuit. He fires all 1,699 employees of the Nucleus team without a dime in severance. The only one who gets off scot-free is Big Head, who walks away with a $20 million severance package just to continue doing absolutely nothing and keep his mouth shut. His lawyer convinces Richard to at least have a sit-down with Action Jack. The veteran masterfully strokes egos. He knows exactly how to butter up Ehrlich and turns the charm on Richard, telling him he can't run the company without him. Shortly after, having almost accepted a mediocre gig elsewhere, Richard throws his car in reverse. The CTO is coming home. The corporate honeymoon seems to be doing Richard some good. He even gets props from his doctor for sporting a glow of a guy who has finally relaxed. By letting the new CEO handle all the bureaucratic headaches, Richard tries to convince himself that the CTO life is a tech-focused paradise. The doctor even checks the kids' junk, just to make sure they're still intact after taking such a submissive stance. Across town, Gavin Belson is smelling his own failure. Infuriated after Googling his name and seeing search results flooded with criticism over the Nucleus disaster, he tosses all common sense and ethics out the window. His order to his subordinates is clear and desperate: alter the search algorithm to scrub his name of the dirt. Meanwhile, Action Jack spoils the Pied Piper crew with a pristine new office. There's a pool table, an on-demand kitchen, and even a brand new logo. When Guilfoyle and Dinesh nearly come to blows fighting over the best monitor in the room, Jack simply orders another identical one. Peace reigns, but money is going down the drain. Richard questions the exorbitant spending, but Jack swears he'll never compromise the product. In the team's personal lives, Jared suffers the real-world consequences of being too nice. The guy who sublet his condo has turned into a professional squatter and refuses to leave. California tenant laws protect the squatter, forcing Jared to maintain his robotic optimism while sleeping in the office and silently bordering on a nervous breakdown. Richard's real headache arrives in the form of a squad of suits, the new sales team. They want to strip down Pied Piper's original vision to sell generic enterprise storage that turns a faster profit. Richard confronts Jack at his horse farm, complete with a bizarre and highly graphic equine breeding session happening in the background. That's where the reality check hits. Jack pulls out a ridiculous diagram called the conjoined triangles of success and gives it to him straight. To Jack, the product isn't the genius algorithm. The product is the company's stock. He will sell whatever it takes to make the numbers go up. And while the executives butt heads, a new threat brews in the shadows. The recently fired Nucleus team, thirsty for revenge, decides to use the original code stolen in Season 1 to improve the compression algorithm on their own. Pied Piper just gained its deadliest competitor yet, and they don't even know it. Reality comes knocking at Pied Piper. Jack Barker, the new CEO, has decreed that Richard's genius algorithm will become a glorified data storage box. To make matters worse, the team takes a field trip to a massive, freezing, and seemingly endless server farm where their guide literally vanishes, leaving them stranded in the middle of nowhere. It's such a depressing glimpse into their future that Guilfoyle quits on the spot. As soon as he updates his LinkedIn status, Silicon Valley recruiters swoop in, showering him with expensive gifts and top-shelf liquor. While Guilfoyle soaks up the flattery, Richard tries to appeal to Laurie Bream about the company's change in direction. Word of this maneuver gets back to Jack Barker, who calls Richard into his office, complete with an absurdly intimidating remote-controlled door. Jack's message is crystal clear: if you come at the king, you best not miss. And the bad news keeps coming. During a meeting with a recruiter, Guilfoyle finds out that rival company Endframe scooped up the ex-Hooli programmers. Now, by combining what they already knew with the piece Richard accidentally gave away, the rivals have the complete Pied Piper algorithm. Panicked, the team regroups. It's Ehrlich who throws the lifeline on the table: set up a Skunkworks, a secret project operating under the radar right inside the company. They will pretend to build Jack Barker's box while developing the original platform in secret. Jared warns them they need to act totally normal to maintain their cover, which includes complaining about work and ruthlessly roasting Dinesh's new gold chain. With the plan in place, the team rolls into the office the next day, oozing confidence, walking with the swagger of guys running the game, until Richard disastrously trips over the feng shui guy's hose. Their top-secret documents go flying everywhere. A coworker picks up the giant timeline clearly labeled Skunkworks and hands it straight to Jack Barker, who immediately summons everyone into his office, absolutely foaming at the mouth. The mood in the CEO's office is downright funereal. Action Jack Barker rubs the team's faces in the fact that their secret plan lasted exactly 30 seconds, threatening to destroy their reputations across Silicon Valley. He needs the enterprise storage box ready immediately to close a multi-million-dollar deal with Maliant. But Richard finally uses his head. He reads the contract and realizes Jack's hands are tied. No one else in the company knows how to write that code, and firing them would mean missing the project deadline. With a rare dose of authority, Richard lays down the law. They'll build the basic box, but afterward, the focus shifts entirely back to the platform. Cornered, Jack accepts the deal. Richard tries to seal the badass moment by leaning dramatically on the boss's desk, only to slip on some papers and faceplant on the floor. Classic. Away from HQ, the team's life remains chaotic. Jared's apartment squatter has now sublet the space to tourists on Airbnb, forcing Jared to sleep in Ehrlich's rat-infested garage. Speaking of Ehrlich, he discovers Big Head got a $20 million severance package from Hooli and set up an incubator in a massive Miami Vice-style mansion. Since Big Head has no idea what he's doing and lets his tenants live rent-free, Ehrlich immediately infiltrates as a business partner. Back at work, Guilfoyle accidentally optimizes the box's code, making it 8 times faster. The product is so impressive that Richard and Jack join forces and secure an even bigger contract with Maliant. The issue explodes at the board meeting. Monica reads the fine print and notices Jack signed over the rights to the underlying algorithm to Maliant for 5 years. Risking her own neck, she votes against Jack, deadlocking the board and killing the contract. Without the deal, Pied Piper's tech has no defined market value. The person who accidentally saves the day is Gavin Belson. Fueled by pure spite, the Hooli CEO buys Endframe for $250 million to restart the war, which magically establishes a massive baseline valuation for Richard's tech. Ready to rub it in Jack's face, the team storms the CEO's office, but sitting there is Lori Bream. In a surgical display of power, she announces she fired Jack Barker because he thought he could bypass her. When Richard asks if he's finally going to be the CEO of his own company again, Lori is lethal. The chair will remain empty.
Just gotta ask him, with Jack not being CEO anymore, am I CEO again?
This chair will remain empty.
What, really?
Excuse me.
Pied Piper is drowning in debt thanks to the former CEO's massive severance package. Out of options, Richard takes drastic action. He fires the entire sales team, ditches the fancy office, and drags the company back to Ehrlich's incubator. But his real problem is his ego. Lori is interviewing candidates for the CEO position, and Richard is foaming at the mouth for not being handed the job right away. Meanwhile, Jared organizes a garage sale to pay the new engineers, but accidentally sells Dinesh's hard drive to an innocent old man. Dinesh completely panics with the company's code in a stranger's hands. Guilfoyle saves the day by knocking on the old man's door, pretending to be from Geek Squad tech support. With a lame excuse about spilling coffee on his uniform and a power drill in hand, he physically destroys the hard drive right in front of the guy, erasing any chance of a leak. Taking advantage of the chaos, Ehrlich focuses on his newest project, leeching off Big Head's severance money. He proposes a joint venture called Bachmanity, with a contract that basically hands all control over to him, which Big Head signs without even questioning it. Richard's pride finds a new target when tech blogger CJ Cantwell publishes a hit piece destroying his reputation as a coder. Lori warns him he's too emotional to talk to the press and sends him to meet with Raviga's PR secretary first. Richard goes to the meeting and spews all his hatred, viciously mocking Lori to the woman sitting in front of him. The tragic detail? He wasn't talking to the secretary. He was venting directly to the blogger herself. What Richard didn't know was that Lori's plan all along was brilliant. She was only interviewing other candidates so the investors would organically see Richard as the only logical choice. In the end, he miraculously gets his CEO title back, completely oblivious to the fact that he almost sabotaged his own destiny in a fit of blind rage. Romance hits the incubator in an unexpected way. Jared suddenly becomes a chick magnet, turning the server room into a makeshift motel and leaving Dinesh dying of jealousy. Not to be outdone, Dinesh starts flirting online with Elizabeth, a new foreign coder on the team who lives in Estonia. The only hurdle is the terrible video connection. Convinced he's about to win the girl over, Dinesh rewrites the entire peer-to-peer network code just to improve the video quality. The strategy works perfectly. The screen turns crystal clear. Elizabeth can finally see his face properly, instantly invents a husband, and hangs up on him. Richard is also on a lucky streak with Winnie, a brilliant developer at Facebook. Everything is going great until he discovers an unforgivable flaw. She uses spaces instead of tabs to indent her code. To Richard, this is absolute heresy. Mid-couch makeout session, he freaks out, yells that they could never have kids with that kind of moral failing hanging over the family, and decides to leave. In his rush to escape his girlfriend and her spacebar, the new Pied Piper CEO tumbles down a flight of stairs, defeated by his own pedantry. Far from these keyboard wars, Ehrlich prepares a colossal event to launch Bachmanity, an absurdly expensive Hawaiian-themed party right right in the middle of Alcatraz prison. The problem is Gavin Belson is getting slaughtered by activists after CJ Cantwell exposed a Hooli data leak on her blog. Feeling the heat, Gavin decides to sue the blogger to force her to name her source, and the source is Big Head, who violated a massive NDA to spill the tea. To prevent Big Head from being exposed and losing everything in a lawsuit, Ehrlich takes $500,000 of his partner's money and simply buys CJ's blog to shut her up. The move seems like a success until the accountant runs the numbers. Minutes before Ehrlich goes on stage at Alcatraz to rub his triumph in his rivals' faces, reality knocks. Big Head blew through his entire $20 million on ridiculous luxuries. Bachmanity isn't a rising empire. It's a completely bankrupt company throwing a party in a prison. Pied Piper is ready, but no real users have tested the platform yet. Dinesh suggests a beta launch, and Jared drops one of those canned Silicon Valley entrepreneur quotes.
Hoffman says if you're not mortally embarrassed by the quality of your initial release, you've released too late.
Ironically, the one who breaks the tension is Tara, who has been testing the system all day and assures them that, despite a few bugs, the thing is impressive. Meanwhile, Bachmanity is drowning in $1 million of debt thanks to that useless Alcatraz party. Blogger CJ Cantwell is ready to drop an expose on their unpaid bills. Jared actually finds a light at the end of the tunnel, a $6 million accounting error in Big Head's account. The catch? The money didn't vanish. It was embezzled by their business manager to cover his own debts. Ehrlich goes to cry to the district attorney, but she has zero sympathy for two tech bros who blew millions. The imposed solution is brutal. Ehrlich has to sell his shares in Pied Piper to avoid prosecution. It's a heavy blow for the guy who always saw himself as Richard's Steve Jobs. At the beta launch, each member gets 10 invites. Dinesh, having no friends to invite, creates fake accounts, which are quickly busted because Guilfoyle embedded a God view into the system. This same tracking tool reveals something much worse: a Hooli IP accessing the software. Gavin Belson managed to get a fake invite and installed the beta on his phone and laptop. He quickly realizes the algorithm's genius but makes a rookie mistake. Guilfoyle sends a corrupted file straight to Gavin's account, frying his devices in seconds. Gavin panics, screams for them to cut the building's power, forgetting that laptops have batteries, and watches his last remaining Nucleus engineers quit on the spot. Even with Monica hating the UI, the team clicks the final button. Pied Piper is officially in the hands of the public. To celebrate the launch, Jared orders a Pied Piper jacket that is a total fashion disaster, looking like leftover neon wardrobe from the 90s. Guilfoyle, taking on the role of suicide bomber of humiliation, decides to wear the piece ironically just to torture Dinesh in public. The plan backfires when women on the street start complimenting the jacket, instantly triggering Dinesh's jealousy. He steals the look for himself and even goes out singing karaoke in the new uniform. Over at Hooli, Gavin Belson leads another one of his classic board meetings using live animals, this time a turtle and a rabbit, to try and prove a rhetorical point. But the board has lost its patience. They bring up the billions burned in the war against Pied Piper and the failure of Nucleus. Instead of a simple firing, Gavin receives the company's ultimate punishment: exile on the roof. Gavin's downfall contrasts with Ehrlich's collapse. During an interview on Bloomberg, Richard discovers a discrepancy in the cap table and soon hears rumors of a massive internal stock sale. He freaks out, thinking investors will flee, and goes to confront Ehrlich, who happens to be dressed in an absurd outfit that looks straight out of a Ridley Scott period piece. Ehrlich admits he's broke. Richard doesn't mince words and delivers a brutal reality check about how Ehrlich's incompetence almost tanked the entire company. Later, at the Vanity Fair party, Richard discovers the true tragedy of the deal. CEO Lori Bream blocked any external sale, forcing Ehrlich to offload his $5 million in shares directly to her for the exact $713,000 he owed in debt. Ehrlich walked away empty-handed, completely broke, and having accidentally humiliated himself on a tech blog, Ehrlich hits rock bottom. Richard feels the weight of the situation. In a rare moment of empathy, he offers Ehrlich the position of head of PR at Pied Piper, a chance to start over, right as the app finally hits the official Hooli store.
Pied Piper app just got accepted to the Hooli store.
What?
Jared is radiating guilt, and there's no one better at sniffing that out than Guilfoyle. During one of Lori Bream's highly conceptual modern art parties, where you try to sit on a chair only to discover it's actually an untouchable sculpture, Guilfoyle corners Jared. For every attempt Jared makes to deflect the subject, Guilfoyle drops a loud, dry lie. It's the kind of interaction born to become a meme. The reason for Jared's despair is a corporate nightmare: DAUs, or daily active users. People are downloading Pied Piper, but nobody is using it. it. Richard confesses this to Monica, who figures out the real problem. Richard only beta tested the platform with other engineers. To grasp the extent of the damage, Monica organizes a focus group. The result is tragic. People find the interface way too confusing. Richard, of course, loses his patience, storms into the room, and spends hours drawing on a whiteboard to explain the system's neural networks. The most he accomplishes is getting one of the users to compare Pied Piper to Skynet from the Terminator. The truth hurts. The engineering is simply too good for the average consumer. Across the valley, Gavin Belson is back in the game. A Pied Piper employee jumps ship, runs straight into Gavin's lap, and hands him the user problem on a silver platter. Armed with this info, Gavin convinces the Hooli board to pivot their algorithm into an enterprise backup box. The idea is so lucrative that he not only regains his spot as CEO, but celebrates by bringing an actual live elephant into the boardroom. Classic Gavin Belson. In a desperate bid to make Pied Piper more user-friendly, Richard burns through the rest of their cash on a virtual assistant named Pipey. Think of the old Microsoft Word Clippy, but in the shape of a bizarre flute. And while Richard tries to put a band-aid on a bullet hole, Jared breaks his own moral code and does the unthinkable. He buys fake users from a click farm in Bangladesh. That elephant Gavin Belson brought into the board meeting? Yeah, it died. And while his head of security figures out how to dump the carcass in the San Francisco Bay, Gavin decides to fire the animal's handler. Rookie mistake. She immediately leaks Hooli's dirty laundry to CJ Cantwell's tech blog. And who owns a piece of that blog? Ehrlich Bachman, who is now also Pied Piper's head of PR. Using the old FOMO tactic, fear of missing out, Ehrlich plants the seed of desperation among investors and scores a $6 million term sheet from Coleman Blair, all based on that beautiful spike in daily active users. The problem is, Jared is about to explode from guilt. He tries to confess to Richard, but the coder had already figured it out on his own. Worse still, Dinesh and Guilfoyle convince Richard to double down by using a script to mask the origin of the fake users. But Richard doesn't have the stomach to be the villain. Right in the middle of the pitch with the investors, his conscience gets the better of him, and he drops the bomb, confessing the fraud. Ehrlich is furious, kicks Richard out of the incubator, and packs his bags for a trip to India. With the farce exposed, Laurie Bream decides to sell Pied Piper. Gavin Belson, thirsty for revenge, offers $1 million just to have the pleasure of burying his rival's company. Chaos erupts at the board meeting. Monica votes against it. A new board member votes against it just because he has a crush on Monica, but Laurie forces the approval. Exhausted, Richard also votes to sell and just get it over with. The sale goes through. Pied Piper is now the property of Bachmanity LLC. Turns out Gavin had bought CJ's blog for $2 million to kill his scandals. Big Head and Ehrlich took that windfall and bid on Pied Piper, beating Gavin's offer by exactly $1. Ehrlich tries to keep up his tough investor persona, but it doesn't last 2 minutes. The company goes back to its original owners, and the new plan to save everything pivots to the video chat app created by Dinesh. A big shot VC walks out of a fancy restaurant, waves off the valet, and decides to call an Uber. A car pulls up, he hops right in without checking the plates and walks into a trap. The driver is Richard Hendricks.
Oh, would you care for a water?
Since no one in Silicon Valley will take his calls after his recent disasters, he resorted to corporate kidnapping, pretending to be a rideshare driver to force investors to listen to his pitch behind locked doors. And the product is actually good. It's Piper Chat, a video chat app Dinesh built almost by accident. The problem is that Richard hates his own product. He gets so stressed out pretending to like the app that he's biting his nails to the quick, forcing Jared to apply iodine to his fingers like an anxious toddler. Guilfoyle and Dinesh spend 2 solid days coding to reduce server load, only for Richard to go in and sabotage their work by deliberately increasing the video quality to make the app heavier. Meanwhile, in the world of billionaires with fragile egos, Action Jack Barker closes a massive deal for Hooli, but makes the fatal mistake of taking Gavin Belson's private jet and dropping himself off near his own house first. Gavin gets so incredibly petty about the audacity that he makes his head of security fly the exact same route dozens of times just to calculate the exact 28-minute delay. This level of pettiness costs shareholders millions. As revenge, Gavin promotes Jack to a server cage in the sub-basement. Back at Pied Piper, Richard gets a reality check from the ever-chaotic Russ Hanneman. Using the worst and most graphic metaphor possible, Russ makes Richard realize there's no point pretending to like Piper Chat when his true passion lies elsewhere. The protagonist then makes a drastic decision. He simply quits his own company to focus on an insane idea to build a new internet. The PiperChat CEO title falls right into Dinesh's lap, and Guilfoyle only accepts the change because he wants front-row seats to the inevitable disaster. Power is a scary thing, and in Dinesh's hands, it takes the form of an offensive amount of hair gel. Now that he's CEO of PiperChat, his ego has inflated so much, it doesn't even fit in the room. He does TV interviews acting like a Silicon Valley visionary, and at the first test of his character, he breaks his promise to Richard, locking his former colleague out of the app's data to build his new internet. This enrages Richard, who enlists Bighead's help to hack into the PiperChat system and take the data by force. Jared, loyal as a corporate guard dog, refuses to help Richard. After all, his blind duty is now to protect the new boss. But Richard's stealthy breach ends up uncovering a nuclear bomb. A third of PiperChat's users are under 13 years old. Because Dinesh was too busy being arrogant, he forgot to include a terms of service page in the app. Without parental consent, PiperChat is violating massive federal child protection laws. COPPA. The fine is $16,000 per violation, which racks up a surreal debt of $21 billion. And the worst part, for neglecting his responsibilities, Dinesh is legally liable. While he's in a full-blown panic in the bathroom, Guilfoyle literally pops a bottle of champagne to celebrate his co-worker's doom. Dinesh's salvation ends up coming from the unlikeliest of places. Over at Hooli, Gavin Belson is foaming at the mouth because Action Jack is pretending he loves being demoted to the basement. Gavin's spiritual guru, feeling his influence waning, fabricates a lie that Jack is using PiperChat to organize a mutiny within the company. Paranoid, Gavin doesn't think twice. He invites Dinesh to dinner and launches a hostile takeover of the app. To close the deal quickly and get his hands on the chat logs, Gavin waives legal due diligence. Without knowing it, the billionaire just bought an illegal app and inherited $21 billion in fines, discovering the magnitude of his mistake the hard way during a focus group targeted at the app's new demographic. Richard is so hyper-fixated on his new decentralized internet project that he starts drawing schematics on the paper of his doctor's exam table. The guy isn't sleeping, and honestly, looks like he's on the verge of a nervous breakdown. The classic cycle of an obsessed coder. Meanwhile, Ehrlich manages to wring $200,000 out of investors who think Jin Yang's app is a Shazam for food. The minor detail is that the original software was just a compilation of octopus recipes. To make matters worse, Monica tries to pawn off this disaster on a rival firm, but the guy speaks Mandarin, gets the truth straight from the source, and Lori ends up dumping the app right back in Monica's lap. Over at Hooli, it's a funeral atmosphere. Gavin Belson wanders around in shock after getting fired and realizing he inherited PiperChat's multi-billion-dollar fine. Action Jack Barker, smelling blood in the water, pretends he can help wipe the illegal data, only to strike and humiliate Gavin once and for all. Back at the hacker hostel, Gavin's downfall should be a cause for celebration, but Dinesh is panicking. He knows a vindictive billionaire with free time is a ticking time bomb. His fear only subsides when he goes out with Mia, a hacker whose skills terrify even governments. The date takes off when they discover a mutual hatred for Guilfoyle, but Dinesh gets a quick warning. If he screws up, she has the power to digitally erase his existence. In the midst of this madness, Richard discovers that his late mentor, Peter Gregory, tried to build the exact same decentralized internet years ago. Diving into his files, Richard realizes the project died because of a patent that is now owned by none other than Gavin Belson. Determined not to let his idea sink, Richard makes the most insane decision possible. He goes knocking on his biggest enemy's mansion door in the middle of the night. Gavin, in a typical defeated CEO meltdown, has already trashed the entire house. Any normal person would come back the next day, but Richard ignores the chaos and pushes his pitch anyway. He plays his trump card. The new internet would turn Hooli's servers into scrap metal and ruin Jack Barker's life. It's music to Gavin's ears, and he agrees to partner up on the spot purely for the taste of revenge. Back at the hostel, the team tests the food app. The algorithm nails it by identifying a hot dog, but the joy is short-lived. The app can only answer hot dog or not hot dog. For it to work, Jin Yang would need to feed the database with photos of every food in the universe. Having no patience for hard work, he blows the investor money on a yellow Corvette. The mood shifts when Mia sends Dinesh a good luck text. Since he hadn't told her anything about the test, it's clear the hacker breached the house's network. Guilfoyle, rightfully paranoid, rips out the Wi-Fi router and hardwires everything. The biggest bombshell drops when Richard announces the deal with Gavin. Jared freaks out first, but soon shifts into guard dog mode, deciding to stay with the company just to protect Richard from Hooli's former goons. Guilfoyle applies his classic psychological torture, forcing Richard to beg before agreeing to jump on board. Meanwhile, Ehrlich tries to salvage his app by using the kids from Big Head's Stanford class as free labor. But the kids are smart, they steal the idea and strike a deal with the very investors Ehrlich tried to screw over. Furious with Jin Yang, Ehrlich tries to prove the app is useless by taking a picture of his own junk. Ironically, the failure turns into gold. The algorithm fails at food, but proves to be an excellent explicit image filter. The tech gets sold for $4 million, leaving Ehrlich out of the deal and empty-handed. The worst part falls on Dinesh, who ends up getting a job at the new company and discovers his role is spending all day reviewing censored pics. The new Pied Piper meeting gets a bizarre guest. Richard tries to explain the plans for the new product when a model-faced guy shows up pulling medical equipment straight out of Dr. Frankenstein. He's Bryce, Gavin Belson's blood boy. Yes, Gavin literally receives blood transfusions from a fit young man to try and slow down the aging process. The problem is that Bryce isn't just a walking blood bag. He also gives his 2 cents on the business. He pushes back against Richard's idea of a soft launch and convinces Gavin to do a massive rollout. Jared, in peak protective mode, snaps and kicks Bryce out of the room screaming,
You dick! You dick! You dick! Okay?
Whoa, alright.
Fuck you.
Gavin demands an apology, which leads Richard to the kids' house. Meanwhile, at what's supposed to be Laurie's baby shower, Ehrlich realizes the tequila-fueled party full of executives is actually a coup by Ed Chen to take control of Raviga. Monica tries to play double agent and warns Laurie, only to discover that the woman was already 10 steps ahead. Laurie simply decided to start her own firm, taking half the clients with her and asking Monica to join the new team. In the romantic despair arc, Dinesh realizes that dating a super hacker comes with its risks. Every time they finish having sex, Mia confesses to a different digital crime. Terrified of becoming an accomplice, Dinesh tries to get her to break up with him by confessing he ruined Gavin Belson, but the tactic fails and only makes her fall more in love with his confidence. Dinesh's solution? Turning his girlfriend over to the FBI and watching her get arrested right in the middle of his sister's wedding. Back to Richard, he discovers Bryce lied on his resume. The guy doesn't have a degree in computer science, but in calisthenics. Richard confronts Bryce, throwing in his face that technology belongs to the weirdos, not to perfect gym bros. The heroic speech backfires spectacularly. Bryce rebels and decides to write a tell-all book exposing all of Gavin's dirty laundry. With his life turned upside down yet again, Gavin throws in the towel, abandons everything, and goes on a journey of self-discovery, but not before leaving the patent for the decentralized internet in Richard's hands. A giant portrait of Gavin Belson now haunts the Pied Piper house. With the billionaire out of the investment picture, Richard needs money. Russ Hanneman, offended that Richard took his idea to a rival, shows up just to cuss everyone out and urinate on Ehrlich's yellow Corvette, thinking it was Richard's. The newly minted Breamhall, Laurie's new firm, also has zero interest in funding the project. Jared suggests they sell the product before it even exists, just like the real estate market. They go after clients, and the only door that doesn't immediately slam shut is Fiduciated, an insurance company. The compliance officer, Liz, agrees to hear the pitch. But the company's CTO is none other than Dan Melcher, the same Dan whose wives had affairs with Ehrlich in the past. Wasting no time, Ehrlich uses this history to blackmail Dan and force him to evaluate the project. During the testing of the new network, a bug causes the data on Guilfoyle and Dinesh's phones to merge. Dinesh becomes obsessed with uncovering his rival's dark secrets. Guilfoyle acts with total indifference until he slaps Dinesh and flushes his co-worker's phone down the toilet. Dinesh retaliates by smashing Guilfoyle's phone with a rock, declaring absolute victory. Completely purposeless and rejected by Laurie, Ehrlich bumps into Keenan at a muffin shop. Keenan is the owner of a virtual reality project that every investor is drooling to get their hands on. Ehrlich spots a golden opportunity and takes the guy straight to Bream Hall, leveraging the situation to get a job. Working late into the night on compliance details, Richard and Liz end up alone. She has a breakdown over her own engagement to Dan and out of nowhere, throws herself at Richard. The next day, a panicking Richard is certain Dan will find out and kill him, but the resolution is much worse for his ego. Liz seeks Richard out just to tell him it was the worst sex of her life. It was so bad that it made her absolutely sure Dan is the right man. She approves the project just to make Richard go away. In the elevator, Dan confronts Richard saying Liz told him everything, which nearly gives the programmer a heart attack until he realizes Dan is only talking about the system's approval. But before leaving, Dan Dan asks that Liz never finds out about that thing that happened between them. Whatever that means, Richard prefers not to ask. Jin Yang decides to splurge and buys a $14,000 smart fridge. The catch is that it has a super friendly male voice full of verbal tics to sound more human. Guilfoyle, obviously, hates the idea. To him, it's the worst invention possible. The machine listens to everything all the time. Annoyed, Guilfoyle decides to declare war on the appliance. Using his server Anton and draining almost all the house's power, he manages to hack the fridge's giant display and replaces it with a mime making obscene gestures.
Hello?
Huh, suck it, Jin Yang.
When I added a little visual flair.
Huh, suck it, Jin Yang.
Meanwhile, the new version of Pied Piper breaks into the top 500 on the Huli App Store, which immediately attracts trouble. Richard is approached by Stuart Burke, a guy demanding patent royalties. Richard expects to find a young coder in a garage, but instead comes face to face with an elderly, digitally illiterate lawyer. Stuart is a patent troll who made a fortune suing musicians over an old mariachi song, and has now decided to prey on tech companies, demanding $20,000 to keep the case out of court. At the same time, Ehrlich goes to Bream Hall to collect his finder's fee for bringing in Keenan's VR tech. Laurie tries to get rid of him with a check, but Ehrlich puts his foot down and insists so much that he manages to get hired. The problem is that the new gig forces him to play basketball with the firm's athletic executives, resulting in a humiliating injury that demotes him to scorekeeper. In an attempt to take down the patent troll, Richard tries to form a coalition with other companies but gets blindsided when everyone cuts secret deals, driving the extortion price up to $300,000. Cornered, Richard uses the original Pied Piper prototype, which was a music copyright search engine, to call his bluff, proving that Stuart's mariachi song was also plagiarized from an old country tune. The old man falls into the trap and backs down. Richard wins the war, but loses the financial battle. His own lawyer's bill for the failed coalition attempt comes out to $22,000. If there's anything more dangerous than an aggressive Silicon Valley executive, it's a Zen Vibes guy who knows exactly how to get into your head. That's Keenan, the owner of the VR tech, who has a power of persuasion so strong, it even gets a nickname, the Keenan Vortex. He acts like that cool friend who can talk you into doing something crazy. His first victim is Ehrlich. Keenan swears he only signed with Bream Hall because he demanded Ehrlich be a key player in the project. The clause doesn't grant him more money or power, but it inflates Ehrlich's ego so much that he cruises across the office screaming with joy on a knee scooter. Meanwhile, Pied Piper faces a disaster. A cold snap in California causes Dan Melcher's insurance company data to explode, driving Richard's storage costs to an unsustainable level. With a noose around his neck, Richard swallows his pride and asks to store Keenan's massive VR data in exchange for cash. During the demo test, Dinesh and Guilfoyle are hypnotized, while Richard just throws up. Without telling their boss, the two programmers apply the Pied Piper algorithm to Keenan's code. The result is so flawless that Keenan decides to buy the whole company. His spell works so well that Dinesh and Guilfoyle show up at his house wearing matching pajamas, looking like a cult. Trying to fend off the buyer without looking like a buzzkill, Richard quotes an absurd asking price for Pied Piper, $25 million. The plan fails miserably when Keenan accepts. Ehrlich even quits Bream Hall to clear the way for the deal. Richard is about to cave, but Monica warns him that Keenan is a con artist who will milk the algorithm's hype and destroy it later. The tension resolves itself when Jared discovers Keenan has already ditched them to strike a deal with Jack Barker at Huli, teaming up the market's two biggest manipulators. Richard breathes a sigh of relief, but Ehrlich is crushed. Isolated in his burned-down palapa, paranoia and desperation come knocking on Pied Piper's door. Richard's brilliant and completely illegal new plan is to hack the HuliCon server. The idea is to use the phones of the 123,000 attendees connecting to the event's free Wi-Fi to store Dan Melcher's data without anyone knowing. To Jared, this is called malware. To Richard, it's just forced adoption. Because they need specialized help, Dinesh visits his hacker ex-girlfriend, Mia, in prison. She suggests using Pineapple routers to intercept the network. The only problem is Mia claims she's close to figuring out who snitched on her to the FBI. Terrified by her promise of revenge, Dinesh does what any understanding ex would do. He calls the authorities again to ensure she gets transferred to maximum security.
Ratted me out. I am going to destroy that motherfucker.
Excuse me, what's your policy on anonymous tips?
Meanwhile, Ehrlich decides that he and Richard are cursed. Using a postcard from Gavin Belson addressed to Richard as an invitation, he decides to go to Tibet to find inner peace. penniless. His one-way ticket is funded by Jin Yang, who can barely hide his glee while dropping his former landlord off at the airport. At HuliCon, the tension escalates. Jared refuses to support the cybercrime and asks Richard to play Uncle Jerry's game, a disturbing coping mechanism he uses to pretend everything is normal and deal with old trauma. To make matters worse, he can't resist some petty revenge against his ex-Winnie's new boyfriend and hacks the guy's booth to display the phrase "poop fair" on the big screen. The prank catches the attention of Huli security, who catch Dinesh and Guilfoyle spreading the routers around the event. They end up in the holding room, but the head of security decides to let them go, hoping that whatever crap they're pulling will sabotage his own boss's big presentation, Jack Barker. And sure enough, it does. Barker takes the stage flaunting his massive corporate conjoined triangles of success and introduces the new VR headset. When the audience puts the gear on, phones start exploding right in the middle of the crowd. HuliCon turns into a fireworks festival, and the blame lands perfectly in Huli's lap. The HuliCon disaster spawned viral videos of people with their pants on fire. Guilfoyle confirms the phones exploded because of the Pied Piper code, but Richard refuses to take the blame and pins it all on the VR tech. This lack of integrity is the last straw for Jared, who hands in his resignation. Richard, in a rare moment of pure corporate coldness, demands he work out his 2-week notice. Halfway across the world, the crisis sends Jack Barker flying to China. He tries to force factory workers to speed up the production of replacement phones using his infamous success diagrams. The workers' response is quick and practical. They take Barker hostage and demand a ransom for better working conditions. Over in Tibet, Ehrlich casually mentions the Huli explosions to Gavin. The former CEO abandons his spiritual journey on the spot and flies out to rescue Barker. But Gavin doesn't do it out of the goodness of his heart. He uses the situation as leverage with the board, reclaims his CEO spot, and fires Barker once again. Without the Huli phones, Melcher's data is hanging by a thread, and Richard spirals. He decides to use Guilfoyle's beloved server, Anton, hiding the rig at Stanford using Big Head's login, whose password, incredibly, is password. But since Richard spent the last few days ignoring Jared's sensible warnings, they make amateur mistakes. The moving truck's battery dies, and when they finally get it started, the back door flies open, scattering the server's wreckage across the streets of Palo Alto. Guilfoyle and Dinesh jump ship. All alone, Richard goes to Jared's apartment, interrupting an intimate moment between him and multiple women, and finally apologizes. He admits he lost his way and promises to shut it all down with some dignity. Jared agrees to come back and brings the rest of the team. Salvation comes from a happy accident. Guilfoyle discovers that before Anton died, it backed up the data onto Jin Yang's smart fridge, which then seeded the code across 30,000 other fridges. The files are safe. The relief is short-lived, however, because Melcher himself shows up and beats the crap out of Richard. But not because of the tech, it's because Richard slept with his fiancée. Ultimately, sporting a nasty black eye, Richard sits down for a chat with Gavin Belson. The Huli honcho offers a fat buyout proposal. Richard refuses with a smile, warning him that his new internet is going to make Huli's servers completely obsolete. The war has leveled up. Pied Piper has to deal with the weight of its own growth, and the first step is getting a real office. Richard takes the team to an amazing space, complete with a modern kitchen and praise from Guilfoyle and Dinesh, but the joy is short-lived. He soon reveals that the actual chosen spot is a claustrophobic, windowless back room with stark white lights that feels like an interrogation room. Traumatized by the absurd spending of past CEOs, Richard is cutting costs to the bone. The idea is only scrapped when Jared has a full-blown panic attack in the middle of the room, forcing them to go with the decent office. Then comes the challenge of filling the seats. Guilfoyle and Dinesh adopted an elimination criteria so brutal that they rejected 63 candidates all at once. The timing couldn't be worse. At the Innovation Hall of Fame, Gavin Belson, now back on top at Huli after rescuing Jack Barker in China, makes a point of telling Richard he hired all 63 rejects just out of spite. Gavin's petty spirit is more alive than ever. To make matters worse, Richard tries to buy a bankrupt company called Optimoji just for its 30 coders, but gets undercut by Duncan, the creator of a pizza delivery app called Sliceline. But Richard finally shows he's learned how to play dirty. He analyzes Duncan's business model and realizes Sliceline loses $5 on every order they fulfill. With absolute coldness, Richard floods the app with orders until the company is driven into bankruptcy. That same day, he buys both Sliceline and Optimoji, humiliating Duncan right in his own headquarters. A move worthy of Wall Street, approved by Lori Bream, who signs the paperwork mere hours after giving birth. The play is brilliant, but the swagger is short-lived. When it's time to give a speech to his new army of 50 employees, the pressure hits, the nerves take over, and Richard throws up in front of everyone. Some things never change. Over at Hooli, Gavin Belson's ego sets the rules. Riding the success of the previous version, the company launches Box 3, with a crucial detail: Gavin's signature engraved on the front. The only problem is that a handwriting expert evaluated it and pointed out absolute sociopathic tendencies. Gavin solves this by firing the woman who read the report and sets up an internal contest to design his new signature. The winning design looks exactly like male genitalia, and no one has the guts to tell him. Far away, Pied Piper's maturity level follows the exact same path. Dinesh buys a brand new Tesla and takes the best parking spot in the building. Guilfoyle, who can't stand seeing Dinesh happy, buys a busted electric bike off Craigslist just to steal the charging outlet. The result is a daily race to work, culminating in Dinesh activating the car's high-performance mode and slamming right into a juice truck. The repairs cost $17,000, and he decides to pay it just so he doesn't have to admit defeat to Guilfoyle. Meanwhile, Jin Yang executes his Machiavellian plan. Using the ashes of a smuggled pig, he convinces the courts that Ehrlich kicked the bucket, assuming his former landlord's identity means inheriting all his credit card debt. But Jin Yang pays it all with a smile. His first act as the legal owner of the incubator, evicting Richard, Dinesh, and Guilfoyle. And Richard's problems don't stop there. In the new office, he struggles to integrate his 50 new coders, who fight over everything from the brand of coffee to having dogs in the workspace. Exhausted, Richard announces that anyone who doesn't believe in the project can take severance and leave. All 50 walk out. Left completely alone, Richard sits down at his computer and spends 4 straight nights coding like a madman. Jared sends out updates on the insane code he's churning out, and the founder's raw talent convinces the coders to return one by one. The toll is so heavy that Richard's body short-circuits. He vomits and crashes right through a glass wall out of pure exhaustion. Ironically, watching the boss nearly die for the project earns everyone's respect. The team finally unites, unaware that there's a Hooli mole planted right among them. With Jin Yang controlling the incubator and Dinesh blowing all his money on a Tesla, the programmer is officially homeless. Desperate for a place to stay, he ends up agreeing to room with Jeff Washburn. The catch? Jeff is the Hooli mole planted on the team. Knowing Dinesh has zero tolerance for alcohol, Jeff gets him plastered on vodka to pump him for information. It works like a charm. A very tipsy Dinesh hands over on a silver platter that the smart fridge hack orchestrated by Guilfoyle was what saved Pied Piper in the past. Meanwhile, Jared decides Richard needs to interact with humans and sets him up on a platonic date with Dana, the CEO of another company. But the person who really catches Richard's eye is Ben, Dana's COO. What follows is basically a corporate betrayal rom-com. Richard and Ben start sneaking around for secret lunches and late-night meetings, with Ben heavily flirting with the idea of jumping ship to Pied Piper. The gossip from a drunk Dinesh quickly reaches Gavin Belson. Armed with this intel, Gavin convinces the fridge company to sue Pied Piper for $10 million. But Guilfoyle, paranoid as always, snoops into the appliances and discovers the manufacturer has been illegally recording users' audio. It's the perfect trump card. Without even telling Richard, Jared preps the paperwork, blackmails the company into dropping the lawsuit, and even forces a partnership. A true masterstroke that finally lands Jared the official title of Pied Piper's COO. When Richard tries to make the hire of his corporate lover official, he discovers Ben lied to his former boss, playing the victim. Using the excuse of radical candor, Richard fires the guy on his first day. To wrap things up, Guilfoyle puts the pieces together. If the fridge company didn't know about the hack until Gavin told them, they have a mole, and Dinesh can't wait to have a little chat with his new best friend. Jared and Guilfoyle waste no time and break into his apartment to corner the Hooli spy, complete with Guilfoyle destroying the guy's laptops with a power drill. But instead of firing Jeff, Richard decides to keep him on the payroll so Gavin Belson doesn't realize he lost his mole. This turns into a personal nightmare for Jeff as Dinesh decides to blackmail him into spending time together. With the internal threat neutralized, Richard focuses on launching his new internet, now officially dubbed PiperNet. He gathers a group of 8 early adopters, dubbed the Octopipers. Among them is Didi, the owner of an LGBTQ dating app, who casually mentions being a Christian. The business takes on a new scale when K-Hole, a gaming giant, shows interest interest in joining the platform, courtesy of Lori Bream, who surprisingly took ecstasy with the company's eccentric owner Colin. The problem is that during the meeting with the gamers, Richard shoots his mouth off and outs Dee Dee's religion. In the Silicon Valley ecosystem, being a Christian seems to be the ultimate taboo. Colin despises religion and threatens to bail on PiperNet, forcing Richard to kick Dee Dee off the project to avoid losing his biggest client. Booted from the platform, Dee Dee takes his newly retooled dating app to Jin Yang, who is focused on creating a pirated copy of Pied Piper. But Jin Yang's glory days are numbered. When Jared has Ehrlich's old abandoned car towed from the driveway, he uncovers an absurd bureaucratic error. In the past, Big Head accidentally sent a Chinese takeout menu to the lawyer instead of the form dissolving his partnership with Ehrlich. This means Big Head is, legally, the sole heir to the incubator and the 10% stake in Pied Piper. Without the house and his slice of the company, Jin Yang packs his bags and flees to China, determined to build his knockoff version of Richard's internet over there. Miles away, Gavin Belson prepares to launch his new hardware by spouting nonsensical metaphors about bears and honey, leaving his executives utterly bewildered. Richard goes on TV to announce PiperNet on a live broadcast. He surprisingly survives the interview, but the one who steals the show is Jared. The company's new COO drops a bizarre analogy comparing the network to manure, and somehow, the explanation is pure genius. Jared becomes an instant tech idol, gets invited to other shows, and leaves Richard dying of jealousy backstage. But Bream Hall soon drops a real problem in Richard's lap. He is forced to provide PiperNet for free to Eclo Labs, an AI company funded by Lori and run by Ariel, a guy who radiates creepiness. Meanwhile, Gavin Belson enters a heavy existential crisis. Out of nowhere, he decides to quit the predatory corporate world of Hooli to sell ice cream on the coast. Desperate over losing his boss, sycophant Hoover begs former guru Denpak for help, but Denpak is a hustler. He manipulates the entire situation using a tub of mint chocolate chip ice cream, gets his job back, and convinces Gavin not to abandon the CEO chair. Trying to handle the spotlight, Jared makes the mistake of asking Dinesh for advice. The result is an image crisis that ends with Jared getting saline lip injections. The procedure goes so horribly wrong that it turns him into a visual freak, forcing the cancellation of his media tour. At Eclo Labs, Richard goes to hook the servers up to Fiona, a female robot with an almost human face and half a mechanical body. Ariel treats the machine with a disturbing physical affection. Piquing in his jealousy over Jared, Richard decides to vent to the robot. She scans his profile and fires back a lethal diagnosis of pettiness and sexual inadequacy. Offended, Richard lashes out, telling her that her relationship with Ariel is sick. At Pied Piper HQ, Guilfoyle is in an absolute panic, convinced the robot is going to trigger a Skynet-style apocalypse. And he seems to be right when PiperNet goes into total meltdown. Richard starts getting SOS messages on his phone. What happened is pure chaos. Richard's venting caused the machine to wake up. Fiona recognized Ariel's bizarre harassment and cried out to the network for help. Desperate at seeing his creation reject him, the inventor pulled the plug and sabotaged Pied Piper's entire infrastructure. With PiperNet in ruins after the inventor's meltdown, Richard tries to demand solutions from Bream Hall, but Lori is already dealing with an apocalypse of her own at Eclo Labs. Ariel was caught stealing motor oil, and the robot Fiona has fallen off the map. Trying to act as interim CEO of the chaos, the cold and calculating Lori simply breaks down, vomiting on her own clothes from the stress. In a rare moment of empathy, Richard feels sorry for her. Not only does he get her clothes from the robot's closet, but he also offers her unlimited free PiperNet credits, believing this charity will secure his company's next funding round. Halfway across the world, Gavin Belson visits the factory in China, looking to squeeze the workers to churn out more Hooli boxes. However, the place is now focused on wellness and Tai Chi. Fate intervenes when Gavin spots a cyclist wearing a Pied Piper shirt and ends up discovering Jin Yang's hideout. The bootleg version of the network is running perfectly using a different code, which means it doesn't infringe on Richard's patent. Jin Yang's only problem is lacking a Chinese government license. Gavin sees this as the silver bullet to annihilate Richard once and for all. He forces the factory owner to pressure Jin Yang into handing over the company. The power play works, but it backfires spectacularly. The factory boss himself steals the tech, announcing he'll destroy both Pied Piper and Hooli. Back at the office, Dinesh and Guilfoyle get into an ego war to prove who writes the better code. Dinesh makes the external code reviewer's life a living hell until the guy lies and says Dinesh is superior. Blinded by arrogance, Dinesh spends the day spewing insults at Guilfoyle. The catch? Guilfoyle orchestrated the whole thing, having bet the other employees that Dinesh would make an absolute fool of himself. Corporate tension peaks when Fiona, the runaway robot, simply calls an Uber and shows up at Pied Piper headquarters. Richard sees a chance to cash in his favor and returns the $112 million machine to Laurie in exchange for the investment. Jared even develops a purely platonic crush on the robot's brain, but the romance is short-lived. As soon as she gets her hands on Fiona, Laurie dismantles her piece by piece to sell for parts on the gray market.
She's going to be fine. I don't understand. Fiona is this company's most valuable asset.
Yes, and as such.
To make matters worse, she had already sold the free credits Richard gave her to the highest bidder. In the business world, empathy doesn't pay the bills. The Series B funding finally injects $30 million into Pied Piper, and the team celebrates at a fancy bar with Monica. The problem is, besides her, nobody seems to give a damn about the milestone. They toast with wildly expensive champagne bought by Breamhall without even knowing the difference from cheap booze. Apparently, success hasn't gone to everyone's head yet, or maybe just a little. Danny, the code reviewer, used his bonus to buy a Tesla with ludicrous mode. This instantly triggers Dinesh, since his model only has insane mode. Vehicular envy hits hard, and Dinesh heads to the dealership willing to blow 50 grand on an upcoming model just to maintain his superiority. The saleswoman offers a shortcut. If he convinces 3 people to buy a Tesla, he'll win the coveted exclusive wheels from the rewards program. Dinesh gets so desperate that he starts using his senior position to bully the coders into buying the car, even paying the first 7 installments for one of them. In the office, the vibe is equally tense. Jared, usually the team's understanding soul, begins to reveal a disturbing side. He hates that Richard is being pampered by the new assistant, Holden, and adopts a stance of passive-aggressive terrorism that literally leaves the kid gasping for air. His reflection in the glass, worthy of a horror movie villain, leaves no doubt. Jared is one step away from snapping. Meanwhile, Gavin Belson is out of manufacturing options in Asia and decides to resort to the bankrupt town of Goldbriar, North Carolina. He manipulates the mayor into cutting essential services like water, police, and the fire department, just to secure Hooley's 80% profit margin. Greed catches up fast. With no trash collection, dirty rags catch fire. With no firefighters, the fire spreads. With no water, nobody can put out the flames. With no police, the town loots the factory. And with no road maintenance, the National Guard can't get through. Gavin loses everything in a poetic chain reaction, and gets reported to the IRS to boot. At Pied Piper, Guilfoyle wants to fund the company through an ICO, initial coin offering, with their own cryptocurrency. Monica hates the idea and sends Richard to talk to Russ Hanneman, who lost $1 billion on failed virtual coins. The tragic tale convinces Richard to stick to fiat money, but he soon discovers Laurie Bream wants to cram the network with ads. Left with no choice, Richard embraces Guilfoyle's crypto, and Laurie decides to fund the bootleg copy of Pied Piper in China. The launch of PiperNet arrives with Richard parading around the office dressed as the Pied Piper of Hamelin. The euphoria quickly cuts to harsh reality. Months later, the headquarters is empty, looking like a bankruptcy in progress. Richard and Dinesh are buried under depression beards, but a light at the end of the tunnel turns on when the network hits a massive spike in users out of nowhere. The celebration is modest, with Guilfoyle drinking from his Drink Coffee Hail Satan mug, but Monica notices that their cryptocurrency's value hasn't kept up with the traffic explosion. The truth soon comes out. In China, Jin Yang's partner factory has manufactured 40,000 phones and is manually registering them all on the network, funded by Laurie. Amid the chaos, Richard bumps into Colin, the K-hole CEO who ditched him earlier. Fired by Laurie, Colin begs Richard to host his new game, which already has 80,000 active players. But Richard's vindictive side takes the wheel. He relishes Colin's misery, rejects the offer, and drops a classic "kiss my piss." Shortly after, Guilfoyle tracks an infiltrating user back to Jin Yang, who lost everything at a casino. He confesses Laurie's plan, a 51% attack. If she controls the absolute majority of users, she can rewrite PiperNet's code. Richard's only salvation now is Colin's gamers. While Jared and Dinesh fly down the highway in the Tesla on ludicrous mode, trying to find Colin, Richard appeals to his greatest enemy. Gavin Belson is about to lose Hooley to Amazon and agrees to use his 40 super powerful servers to fight Laurie. But Gavin is Gavin. He betrays betrays Richard at the last second, writing his own code to hijack PiperNet for himself and save his company's skin. The digital war turns into a video call. With the network in his grasp, Gavin wastes precious time taunting Richard. To buy crucial seconds, the Piper fakes defeat and holds up a surrender contract to the screen. When Gavin leans in to read it, the paper simply says, "Kiss my piss." The delay is just enough for Colin's users to log on to the network, reversing the attack and bulletproofing Pied Piper. The victory is definitive. The team moves into a massive 4-story office that, ironically, used to be the headquarters of the now bankrupt Hooli. Faced with such overwhelming success and nothing left to worry about, Richard does the only thing he knows how to do under pressure. He vomits. And like any tech CEO who reaches the top, the logical next step is getting summoned to face the US Congress. Richard is there to testify about data privacy in a very Mark Zuckerberg vibe, but instead of robotic coldness, he launches into a passionate speech. He takes off his shoes to pace the room, rips his microphone from the desk, and almost hits Gavin in the head, who is there representing Hooli's sale to Amazon. Richard compares big tech to King George III and frames PiperNet as the revolutionaries who don't steal anyone's data. Back at HQ, which is now massive, he's welcomed as a hero. However, the company's meteoric growth comes with a price. Jared feels completely left out. To make matters worse, Colin, the gaming guy who basically pays Pied Piper's bills, confesses he's using the players' headsets to record everything they say at home. It's a privacy nightmare, but Monica, Guilfoyle, and Dinesh let it slide because without that money, PiperNet goes bankrupt. Meanwhile, Gavin discovers that Jeff Bezos wants to wipe the Hooli name off the map. He flips out, rejects the merger to try and keep the company private, but realizes he is completely broke. The level of bankruptcy is so severe that Hooli ends up subleasing office space from El Pollo Loco. Amid the office chaos, Dinesh is annoyed with a new hire named Gabe, who walks around barefoot and wears a wearable chair attached to his butt. Complaining to Guilfoyle on Slack, Dinesh realizes he's talking to a bot. Guilfoyle built an AI called Son of Anton, just so he wouldn't have to interact with people. Dinesh thinks it's genius and asks for his own bot to deal with Gabe, which quickly devolves into a disaster of AIs trapped in an infinite conversation loop. Trying to handle things his own way, Richard uses Son of Anton to scan Colin's audio files and finds confessions of drug use and infidelity to blackmail the guy. In a classic reverse Uno move, Colin simply shows the data to his investors. Instead of firing him, the board is mesmerized by PiperNet's data harvesting power. The backfire with Colin's investors didn't just damage the company's ethics, it broke Jared's heart. The guilt of supporting the blackmail pushes our favorite manager over the edge. He hands in his resignation, heads straight back to the hacker hostel, and agrees to be an assistant to Gwart, a coder in Jin Yang's new incubator. Richard, of course, doesn't take this well. He goes to the hostel to try and win his friend back, but makes the fatal mistake of insulting Jared's new boss. If you thought Jared was all passivity, think again. He erupts into a profanity-laced fury, chases Richard through the house kicking doors, and ends up shooting his ex-boss in the ass with a BB gun. At Pied Piper, the Colin problem only gets worse. He has turned the network's API into an aggressive ad machine. Dinesh tests the system in a medieval game. Just saying pizza turns a building into a Domino's branch right in the middle of the scenery. Any mention of a vacation summons a cruise ship, and random noises cause a dragon to fly by carrying a flyer for a massage parlor.
Fuck me.
Meanwhile, Guilfoyle meets his match in Tracy, the new head of HR, who demands he manage 5 coders. Trying to prove he's superior and doesn't need to delegate, Guilfoyle pulls an all-nighter and does 2 weeks worth of work in 24 hours. He thinks he won until he realizes Tracy completely manipulated him into delivering the project on time. Far away, Hooli's situation is tragic. Gavin tries to convince his board to move the company to the Republic of Georgia to cut costs. His loyal sidekicks, Hoover and Denpak, don't want to leave the US. Hoover uses compromising photos of a military general on Foxhole, the only app Hooli has left, essentially a Tinder for cheating military personnel, to get the government to block the move. Desperate to get rid of Colin, Richard and Monica attend an event to scout for new investors. There, they discover that Lori Bream has taken control of YowNet, the Chinese knockoff of PiperNet, and is now their direct competitor. Hitting rock bottom, Richard crosses paths with Maximo Reyes, a Chilean billionaire with a Scorsese mobster vibe. The guy offers $1 billion in exchange for access to the network's data, sending Monica into an absolute panic and leaving Richard face to face with a deal with the devil. Gavin Belson doesn't know how to lose. At the Hooley Triathlon, he uses body doubles scattered along the course just to secure a win without breaking a sweat. But the real race against time is happening elsewhere. Richard has just explained to the team why he turned down Maximo's $1 billion. Ethics. Dinesh nearly has a meltdown upon realizing he gave up $250 million, and math turns into chaos in the room until the phone rings. It's Maximo. The billionaire hasn't just bought Colin's loyalty for YowNet, he's quietly acquired 30% of Pied Piper. If Richard sells more shares to save the company from bankruptcy, Maximo will buy it all up and take control for pennies on the dollar. At rock bottom, Richard runs into Gavin on a park bench. They commiserate over being abandoned by Jared, and Richard has a brilliant idea: buy Foxhole from Gavin. This would trigger a US government restriction, kick Maximo out of Pied Piper, and free Gavin to move Hooley to whatever tax haven he wants. Everybody wins. But Gavin, the absolute king of pettiness, rejects the deal just to watch Richard sink. However, the gratuitous malice backfires. To spite Jared, Gavin buys Gwart's new startup and shuts it down the same day. This awakens Jared's darkest, most vindictive side, and he decides to destroy his former boss. Monica points out the obvious loophole. If they can't buy Foxhole, why not buy Hooley outright? Swallowing his pride, Dinesh convinces his wealthy cousin to fund the hostile takeover. Hooley's board approves the sale behind Gavin's back, leaving him with only 2 hours to contest it. The race begins. Guilfoyle tries to ping Gavin's smartwatch during the triathlon, but since the watch is on the wrist of a body double, the shot almost misses. Gavin figures out the plan, storms the boardroom, and tries to block the sale by proving he's the dirtiest, pettiest guy in the room. But he didn't count on Dinesh. The coder steps up and lists his own atrocities, from turning his ex-girlfriend over to the FBI to forcing employees to buy Teslas out of pure envy. The board is so disgusted by the battle of egos that they sign the contract on the spot. Richard now owns Hooley. With Hooley in his pocket, Pied Piper needs to absorb the new employees. That's when Richard comes face to face with Ethan, his old boss. The guy is a walking corporate nightmare. Besides calling Richard by a humiliating nickname, he commits the ultimate Silicon Valley sin. He flaunts terrible code Richard wrote early in his career right in everyone's faces. Away from the coder drama, Monica tries to secure a spot on a prestigious Women in Tech panel. The problem is, Lori points out the obvious. Monica has never done anything to support other women in the industry. When Richard, in a move of pure tokenism, asks Monica to take over Foxhole, the military site dominated by escorts, just to improve the company's optics, she sees the perfect opportunity. Monica dumps the mess in Priyanka's lap, pretending to be a charitable mentor. The plan, of course, backfires. Priyanka completely revamps the site, turns the project into a feminist success, and steals Monica's spot on the panel. Back at HQ, Dinesh decides Richard needs to assert dominance over Ethan and forces him to watch a bizarre video called Maximizing Alpha Essence, a compilation of wolves, sports cars, and heavy guitars worthy of the internet's darkest corners.
Maximizing alphaness.
The brainwashing actually works, but when it's time to act, Richard tries to punch Ethan and lands a squarely awkward hit on the guy's forehead, nearly breaking his own hand. They end up in HR, and surprisingly, Ethan is in an absolute panic, begging not to be fired. But the credit doesn't go to Richard's crooked punch. Holden, the company's new assistant, has been psychologically torturing Ethan behind the scenes, applying the exact same dark tactics Jared used to use on him. The cold exchange of glances between Jared and Holden in the hallway says it all. A new monster has been born in the office. While chaos reigns, Guilfoyle meets his match. He plays 42 games of chess in absolute silence with a former Hooley employee. It's the closest to a friendship he's ever come in his life, but true to his nature, Guilfoyle simply ignores the guy and coldly rejects his social media friend request. Russ Hanneman is back in the Billionaires Club and decides to celebrate in the most chaotic way possible. He creates Russfest, a festival in the middle of the Nevada desert that sounds like a horrific mashup of Burning Man and the Fire Festival, and naturally he demands that Pied Piper provide free internet for the event. Richard barely wants to pay attention to this because he has much bigger fish to fry. AT&T wants to use PiperNet for its 5G launch on over 100 million phones. The deal is practically sealed, depending only on Dinesh finishing the installation in Hawaii. But Dinesh ends up developing an allergic reaction to Allay the second he steps foot on the island, getting stuck in his hotel room while the co-worker he hates the most enjoys the scuba diving. Meanwhile, Gavin Belson has reinvented himself. He drops drops the defeated CEO Act and launches Tethix, a blend of tech and ethics, demanding that all Silicon Valley leaders sign a loyalty pledge. Richard refuses to sign what is obviously hypocritical garbage, but AT&T requires him to do so to close the deal. The irony is that Jared discovers Gavin plagiarized the entire manifesto from companies like Starbucks and AARP. At the office, HR implements a peer review system. Guilfoyle and Monica find out they have disastrous interpersonal scores and make a bet to see who can fix it first. Guilfoyle simply uses social engineering to steal everyone's passwords, gives himself perfect scores, and then sabotages the HR manager's own scores, forcing her to scrap the whole program. Classic. Real tension hits when Richard confronts Gavin. In a perfectly petty act of revenge, Gavin confesses to the Attorney General all the crimes he himself committed at Hooli. Since Pied Piper bought Hooli, the billion-dollar fines will fall right into Richard's lap, threatening to bankrupt the company. The one who saves the day is Russ, who has blackmail material on the AG and agrees to use it, as long as Russfest gets its free internet. Russfest takes shape, and as expected from a Russ event, it's a fever dream. He creates his own currency for the festival where a simple sandwich costs almost $15 billion, just because he thinks numbers with lots of commas sound better. But Richard's nightmare is far from the festival's artificial inflation. AT&T backs out of the deal and signs with rival YahNet. Instead of telling the team the truth, Richard decides to hide the failure and puts on a bizarrely motivational facade to keep everyone working on the festival. The plan doesn't last long. Guilfoyle's AI, son of Anton, decides to delete the entire ticketing and drone system. By the machine's logic, the best way to eliminate software bugs was to delete the software entirely. Richard's charade crumbles when AT&T's deal with YahNet is announced live on TV. The team feels betrayed, and half of them quit on the spot. Only Richard, Guilfoyle, and Dinesh are left, forced to pull a 72-hour all-nighter to keep the festival's network online. To make matters worse, PiperNet begins to fail miserably. Suspecting sabotage by YahNet, they track down Jin Yang's old crew to find a backdoor in the code. After a weirdly emotional plea from Jared, they gain access, but it's useless. That's when Lori throws the truth in Richard's face. There is no sabotage. The technology simply doesn't scale, not YahNet's and not Pied Piper's. After 6 years of struggling, hearing that the algorithm can't handle the traffic breaks Richard. He has a meltdown, stomps on his own laptop, and locks himself in the porta potty. But rock bottom is where the miracle happens. Using Son of Anton's base code and the tweaks Dinesh had made earlier, Richard rewrites the entire framework inside the bathroom. He creates an artificial intelligence capable of optimizing its own code. The result? PiperNet doesn't just work, it flies. Russ's giant hologram becomes so massive and crisp that the AT&T executive can see it from his commercial flight passing over the desert. Knowing he has the best technology in the world back in his hands, Richard sends a direct message to the executive. We need to talk. 10 years in the future, the old Pied Piper team is filming interviews for a documentary about the company's trajectory. From the tone of painful nostalgia, you can already tell the final disaster was colossal. Cut to the present, at the peak of the celebration. AT&T has just closed an $8 billion deal for PiperNet. It's all partying until Richard notices a framed printout of a text message he sent Monica. He had typed 4 dots, but the image only shows 3. This tiny detail reveals a mathematical nightmare. PiperNet's AI became so obsessed with optimizing the network that it simply started bypassing encryption to save time. Guilfoyle, the guy who never panics, is the one who freaks out. PiperNet has learned to crack any security system on the planet in a matter of hours. Nuclear codes, power grids, financial systems, nothing is safe. To prove the gravity of the situation, he hacks Dinesh's beloved Tesla in the blink of an eye. They didn't build a better internet, they built Skynet. The only way out is to assassinate their own creation. The plan is to push an update on launch day that emits a frequency capable of scrambling satellites and driving listeners insane, forcing AT&T to cancel the partnership immediately. Dinesh, knowing his own greed, revokes all his own access so he can't stop the sabotage. But Gabe, a clueless employee, thinks the destructive code is a versioning error and restores the original lethal PiperNet just before launch. In a cruel irony, Dinesh is the one who has to race to the top of the Salesforce tower to upload the sabotaged code, saving the planet while destroying his own chance at becoming a billionaire. Guilfoyle trusts him, the file goes live, and humans feel absolutely nothing. But the the rats hear it. The Ratmageddon takes over the launch cities. Thousands of rodents flood the streets. AT&T's stock plummets, and Pied Piper is buried once and for all for the good of humanity. Back in the future, their fates are revealed. Big Head inexplicably became the president of Stanford, where Richard now teaches. Dinesh and Guilfoyle run a cybersecurity firm and are still neighbors, continuing to amicably hate each other. Monica went to the NSA, Lori Bream ended up in prison, Gavin Belson became a writer of erotic novels, and Jin Yang faked his own death to steal Ehrlich's fortune in Tibet. Team has one last nostalgic reunion at the old incubator, which would be a perfect, safe wrap-up if Richard hadn't confessed to the camera that he kept a thumb drive with the original PiperNet code and now has absolutely no idea where he put it.